All right, welcome back to Cheddar, everyone. Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Sundar Pichai, Mark Zuckerberg, and all of these big tech CEOs who have been watching and paying close attention to the proceedings on Capitol Hill. They endured more than 5 hours of tough questions at yesterday's antitrust congressional hearings. Among the accusations hurled at the CEOs of the biggest tech companies in the world, stifling competition through acquisitions, stealing content from developers, and skewing search results to benefit their companies. Our next guest, Matt Gaetz, Florida representative and author of Firebrand, Dispatches from the Front Lines of the MAGA Revolution due out this September, had a chance to question the top 4 CEOs. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman. There he is. All right, you asked Google CEO Sundar Pichai about the company's support for law enforcement. Want to take a listen into that real quick.
Will you take the pledge that Google will not adopt the bigoted anti-police policy that is requested in the most recent letter?
Congressman, we have a long track record of working with law enforcement when it is supported by due process and the law. We push back against overbroad requests. We are transparent about the requests we get, but we have a long history of following the law.
Now, given that you are limited in the time that you're allowed to present these questions when you're there in the hearing, I want to get your response and what you made of Sundar Pichai, Google CEO's response.
I was very grateful that Sundar Pichai took a pledge not to adopt anti-police policies that are overbroad, that would deprive cops of everything from the technology that keeps them safe in their job to basic services like email. And Google has in the past been responsive to calls from their employees to change their business practices, and it's been very troubling to me, particularly when Google pulled out of Project Maven, which was a joint venture with the United States military, only for Google to then go and engage in joint ventures with the Chinese military. So good news, cops are still going to get their Gmail. I was grateful for that concession.
The hearing seemed to get off topic of antitrust on more occasions than one, but in the name of antitrust, was there any response that you received or heard during the proceeding that would quell or, on the other end, perhaps further worsen your antitrust concerns?
I was deeply concerned when we saw evidence time and again of companies like Amazon stealing the intellectual property of some of the sellers on their platform so that they could benefit their own private labels. I was also concerned about the extent to which Google, through their market dominance in search, can manipulate outcomes with the development of blacklists and then allowing their employees access to be able to put content on that blacklist. And that's especially troubling to me given the 2016 meeting that was caught on tape in Sundar Pichai's office, where some of the top executives at Google were saying that they viewed it as their obligation to ensure that Trump's win in 2016 was only a blip in history and that it was not repeated in 2020. I think those are central to antitrust issues.
And so you've been vocal on the belief that these tech giants are censoring conservatives. What was the response yesterday from the CEOs about that?
Well, the big question is whether or not that censorship can occur through manual manipulation. And both in Mark Zuckerberg's case and in Sundar Pichai's case, they had previously testified to Congress that their employees didn't have the power to manually edit what people see. Yesterday, they had to adjust that testimony and in fact admit that there are circumstances where individual employees have the ability to exercise their bias on these digital platforms. And I don't think it's a coincidence that sites like the Daily Caller, the Gateway Pundit, Breitbart continually see their content disadvantaged, particularly on Google.
And so were you quelled in terms of some of the concerns? Were you kind of appeased with some of the responses that you heard from Google when Sundar Pichai, as we were tuning in, did say that he would ensure that the platform is neutral in this upcoming election, similar, as he said, to the previous election?
Well, we have to judge Google by their actions, not just by their words, especially because the words seem to change. Like I said, even the issue of manual manipulation has seen changing testimony from Google's CEO. And so, no, I'm not satisfied that there is sufficient transparency to ensure that these platforms earn the liability protections that they get in the law as a consequence of their neutrality. Now, I'm not fully signed up for the Elizabeth Warren view of the world where tomorrow we have to go and break up these tech giants. I actually think there are intermediary remedies that would require transparency so that you didn't see folks doing by algorithm what they can't do in the ballot box.
What would some of those intermediary transparencies be, and how would you roll them out?
Well, it would likely occur through the discovery process in litigation. You're aware that all 50 attorneys general throughout the country have engaged in litigation against Google regarding their market dominance in the ad space. But in search, I think that the Department of Justice should initiate antitrust litigation, use the discovery process to determine the extent to which these platforms are or are not neutral. A lot of times that requires witness testimony and depositions. But my suspicion is that if major technology platforms had to be transparent about how content was blacklisted, reviewed, or accelerated, that they would behave better, that would inform the actions of those companies. And whether you're a conservative, a liberal, an independent, or a Whig, you would have an equal opportunity to share your viewpoint and have others see it.
And then just quickly on this as well, and we'll move on. Are you recommending that any of these companies be fined as a result of yesterday's proceedings or any future fact-finding?
Well, I do think that Zuckerberg in particular perjured himself when he said that there wasn't a manual manipulation tool. Then there were leaked documents showing that there were, and then he had to change that testimony today. So lying before Congress is a serious crime, and I do believe that ought to be investigated. In terms of fines, I think that due process is important, but Facebook has already shown they don't mind paying fines. They've paid some of the largest fines as a consequence of violations of court orders and consent decrees with the Department of Justice. So I don't believe that fines alone will be a sufficient remedy, because some of these tech platforms will simply bake those fines into their business model.
Just moving along with the time that we have left here, speaking with Fox News' Tucker Carlson, you said, and quote, "Big tech will steal this election from Donald Trump and the American people." What evidence supports that?
The fact that conservative websites get disparate treatment, particularly in search, particularly with Google. Google said it was a glitch that the Daily Caller, the Gateway Pundit, the Western Journal, and Breitbart all were delisted in news. Well, that strikes me as a pretty consequential glitch. Also, Twitter shadow banned 4 members of Congress during the Russia investigation. Myself, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and Devin Nunes, we were 4 of the most outspoken supporters of the president. And so if time and again you see conservative viewpoints shadow banned or disadvantaged with no explanation, with no transparency, it calls into question the true motives of these tech platforms.
Speaking of elections, today President Trump tweeted about possibly delaying the November election. Do you support delaying the election?
No, we're not going to delay the election. I think the president was expressing his frustration with some of the techniques that are going to be rolled out in vote by mail. My state of Florida is a state that allows vote by mail. I believe that vote by mail is a safe and secure way to vote. Of course, it is susceptible to fraud, and that's why we need great supervisors of elections and elections officers throughout the country. But I'm for an election that's on time, fair, and honest.
Okay, and it sounds in line with what we've heard recently from Mitch McConnell as well, and some reporting coming out of the Hill. While we have you as well, school will start virtually in Orange County on August 10th. I know this isn't your district, but it is in your state. What precautions would you like schools to take before the new school year starts, as coronavirus cases in Florida, they continue to rise, and do they currently have the funding necessary to do so?
So the organizing principle of the educational approach is parental empowerment and parental choice. Parents have to have the option to have online learning if they have a unique medical frailty or if they're just not comfortable. What I've seen from surveys from parents in a few districts across Florida is that 1 out of every 5 students might not return in full to a traditional learning environment. So what we have to do is we have to use that as an opportunity for more spacing. We do have the funds in the state of Florida to convert cafeterias and multi-purpose rooms and media rooms into additional classroom space so that we can have social distancing, but we also need hand washing stations, we need enhanced sanitation, and we need cooperation from students and parents to wear masks in the learning environment to stop the spread of COVID. But if we don't get kids back in school, if we don't allow parents at least the option of sending their kids back in school, the American Society of Pediatrics has put out some pretty persuasive research on the negative mental health consequences and educational consequences for America's young people.
All right, good to have you here with us today. Matt Gaetz, Florida representative. We have to leave things there. He's the author of Firebrand Dispatches from the Front Lines of the MAGA Revolution due out this September. Thanks so much for the time.